My name is Michael Goldberg. I know and at least have met everybody on the Zoom call, but for those who are watching on LinkedIn Live, I'm our executive director of the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship at Case Western Reserve. I also teach at the Weatherhead School of Management. And it's great to welcome Joe to our alumni speaker series. Joe, we read about you, was it Fortune? There was an article about Clove. It was in one of which magazine was it in?
It might have been Fast Company or Forbes.
It was Fast Company,
when we launched.
So some folks sent it around. And I think one of the remarkable things that we find, because our university graduates lots of awesome people and people go off in the world and, we're always learning cool new things that people are doing. So this chance today to engage with you here about your journey is great. All of the sessions that we do as part of this series are moderated by students. And I know you've connected with Earl Shea, who's a great undergraduate student. I saw him early this morning on the tennis courts. That's part of my commute. Socially distant from his teammates with masks on. I was very impressed. So I got to see Earl this morning, and Earl worked in venture capital this summer as part of our remote entrepreneurship project program, and was nice enough to moderate the session. So for anybody that's watching on LinkedIn Live, just put a question if you have a question for Joe in the chat, and we'll make sure we feed it to Earl. And for those of us that are watching on Zoom, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So you can either raise your virtual hand, your real hand, just put something in the chat, and we'll make sure that your questions get integrated in the conversation. So with that, let me turn it over to Earl.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Goldberg. So just to give everyone a little context about me, my name is Earl Shea. I'm a senior at Case Western Reserve University right now. I'm pursuing a bachelor's in economics and master's in finance as well. And then Joe, on the other hand, is a CWRU grad, graduated in 2011, got his bachelor's in accounting and master's of accountancy as well. So thanks for coming, Joe. Nice to finally meet you.
Thanks, Earl.
Yeah, no problem. And so I just kind of want to start off and give people a little bit more background about your post-grad career. You can talk about your time at Deloitte or at Wharton, just kind of what that was like to give people more context.
Yeah, so first off, it's an honor to be speaking to folks back at CWRU. It was such a fantastic place to learn about the world. I grew up in small town Ohio, so a lot of what I figured out about the real world happened in the halls at Weatherhead and around the campus. So it's really fond memories. So I graduated. I'd studied accounting at Case, and Dr. Gary Previtz had helped me land this position with the an accounting standards board on the East Coast in Connecticut. So it was kind of like straight into the ivory tower of accounting, and it was an amazing place to operate with really intelligent people. But I ended up pivoting from that into Deloitte's M&A group after the year fellowship was over. So I spent 4 years in New York City working at Deloitte in 30 Rock. My main client was Blackstone, and helped them buy all kinds of stuff. And it was really an amazing way to learn about business and what makes businesses work well and what makes businesses not work well. But I knew, and I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur from a very young age. I was passionate about it. And I just always had that inclination, but never knew really how to execute it. And so I ended up going to Wharton's MBA program, specifically to focus on launching a venture while I was there. And that's really where Clove happened.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a really impressive just kind of post-grad career and how you kind of pivoted in like many different aspects. So I was wondering, just kind of, were there any key lessons from Deloitte that you, or Wharton or wherever from Case that you picked up and you still kind of apply to your life today or apply to Clove today?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking this week about Case in particular, and I think one point I got very lucky because my advisor or me, I should probably take the blame. I was one credit short of what I needed to be. And so Dr. Previtz raised his hand and said, "Oh, you can just do a one-on-one study with me." And that was so incredible because it was really just turned into a history of business class, like literally from when Wall Street was a wall, an actual wall to protect people from coming, all the way to, present day. And it was just such a cool experience to work one-on-one with a professor. And then I think the other class that it was an entrepreneurship class actually with, and he's passed away, but the gorilla, Richard Osborne, I always just know him as the gorilla, incredible professor. And he brought a lot of entrepreneurs, investors into class, and you got exposure. So like those were two really fond memories that kind of solidified my excitement about it. I think Deloitte, as I mentioned before, I really enjoyed getting to meet effectively founders that were at the end of their kind of founder life cycle when they're either selling the business or selling it to private equity. I worked for private equity clients. And so it was cool to like kind of humanize those folks and sit across the table from them and realize that, I could start to see like, okay, this is an achievable dream. I'm meeting these people, I'm engaging with them on a near equal basis. And that was really helpful just to like give me the confidence to even think I could do something in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's actually kind of crazy. We actually kind of share a similar path in the sense of I took a class with Professor Scott Shane, and he brought in a lot of investors and entrepreneurs themselves, and I had no idea what venture capital was until I took his class, and it kind of just like sparked my interest from then on. So that's actually quite an interesting parallel that we have. But yeah, definitely see how your time at Deloitte, humanizing those people and kind of working with them would help you later on with Clove. Just to kind of help out the students as well, I'm kind of stealing a question from Professor Goldberg because I saw him ask this to another person, but you said if you have this name Deloitte on your LinkedIn page, and I bet you get a lot of incoming messages from students. And so I was wondering, could you give CWRE students just kind of the best advice on how to reach out to you and how to get you to actually respond to them, or for you to take 15 minutes of time with them?
Oh, you're saying like the most effective way to get somebody's attention.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I think when it's the messages that are hard for me to respond to are the ones where I'm not sure how I can help. Right? Like it wasn't teed up well enough for me to say like, oh, I can draw from this insight. And if we hop on the phone, or even a lot of times it's actually easier just to respond via email. If people that give you the out of like happy to hop on, or honestly, if you can give advice over email, that actually sometimes then makes me more inclined to get on the phone with you, because it's like you're not really pressuring
right
me to get time, because time is so hard to come by. And everyone knows that. But yeah, I think making it very actionable. I mean, and frankly, I had the same thing with Clove when I was reaching out to cold calling people to understand the industry, and I got to practice what I'm preaching now, which is like, do your homework so that when you're sending a message to someone, it seems you're teeing it up for them to be able to answer the question.
Right.
And a lot of times, like for instance, one of the very first cold calls I made for Clove was this guy who had started and sold a footwear business. And I called this number that I found online, and it ended up being his personal cell phone. So I had like 30 seconds to grab him. And I was like, all I need is 10 minutes. I have some very general questions. And that turned into a 2-hour phone call. So I think it's like having that. It's the same thing with an email, that 30 seconds, it's really tight and actionable, and then it may turn into something better.
Yeah, definitely agree there. I think that's definitely a common answer a lot of people give, and it's tough to find that 30-second thing, but once you do, I think you can make some truly meaningful like connections there. So yeah, definitely some great advice there. So well, you're here for Clove, so I'm going to transition a bit to Clove. I'm going to start transitioning there. So how did you come up with the company, and like why was footwear for healthcare workers something that truly inspired you?
Yeah, well, before I land on that, I'll be honest about my entrepreneurial journey. So I applied to business school with an idea that had come out of my prior experience in the M&A group at Deloitte. And within 6 weeks of getting to Wharton and starting the entrepreneurial track, I disproved it. So I had just completely changed my life, upended, moved to Philadelphia, brought my wife with me. And, you know, and I had this kind of sobering moment of, okay, do I put a suit on and go get a job again, or am I going to do what I came here to do? And I obviously decided to do the latter. And the idea was, okay, well, I have this amazing experience of falling flat on my face, but I learned a ton in doing it. How do I quickly vet an idea? How do I look at the opportunity, look at any opportunity and see, okay, here's like the 12 key hypotheses that have to be true. What are the 2 or 3 most important, and how do I very quickly vet them? And so I started like vetting ideas and using that framework. Meanwhile, my wife is a registered nurse. She had started working at Penn here in Philadelphia, and I watched her buy 4 pairs of shoes in 4 months and spend almost $500. And more than just that volume of shoes, it was the time she was spending looking for something. And she bought a pair from a cool startup that makes shoes out of wool that she really loved the experience of, but they weren't made for life in the hospital. They weren't durable. They didn't liquids seep through and absorbed into them. And that was really the aha moment of, okay, what if we could bring that level of experience and brand affinity, but then make a product that every single aspect of it was specifically tailored to healthcare. And so that was really the genesis of Clove. And it took a couple months to prove out all those hypotheses, like I mentioned. So I really had the idea in November. And then by February, I was like, I really want to do this, and was full steam ahead on Clove.
Got it. Yeah, that's a very interesting background. But I think when I called you and we talked about what we were going to talk about on this call, I mentioned why I'm interested in startups or just kind of venture capital in itself is I'm an athlete. I'm on the men's varsity tennis team here at Case. And I can draw a lot of parallels between being an owner of a company or starting a company and just kind of being an athlete that's truly trying to accomplish something. And you mentioned to me that you had joined a bike group or like some sort of group in New York, and how that kind of encouraged you to start Clove. So I kind of want you to elaborate on that, because we didn't talk about it much, but it'd be cool to hear that story.
Yeah. And thank you, Earl, for that. Cause it is a fundamental piece where when I moved to New York City, I'd always played sports my whole life. And I was like in that moment of like, I was working really hard and I needed that outlet, and I found cycling. And so it became like a weekend thing. And then it turned into, I was racing, and then it turned into, I was joining this really incredible team in New York City, and was like showing an aptitude for the sport. And cycling, and especially fitting that into as a student athlete, or me as, working more than I should have been at Deloitte, it really it pushed you to, at least me, I was so passionate about it, and it pushed me to really like have this focus and try to get really, really great at something very specific. And I ended up having a lot of success and raced all up and down the East Coast and national championships. And that was a really big proving point for me of like walking into something that was completely foreign, learning a ton about it, and then trying to excel at it. And there's a lot of parallels to sport and entrepreneurship, where I didn't know anything about footwear. I had a really key insight from my wife, and knowing her career as a nurse. And that was kind of like the key insight, but I started to prove out, how do you make a shoe and what vendors are out there? And it was a very solo effort to start. And I kind of think of it, you're perfecting this craft as an entrepreneur, you can perfect your craft as an athlete. But you kind of have to have that, you wake up in the morning and you're plodding, straight along into getting better and better and better at this thing. And there's a lot of parallels to sport in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with you there. Just the fact of getting better and better every day, no matter what it is, just to accomplish a singular goal, is both prevalent in athletics and entrepreneurship. So it's definitely a lot of parallels there. And so I guess just to base off, like, you had no knowledge of the shoe industry. So I guess, what was that learning curve like? What kind of like hurdles or challenges, or like, let's say like 2 specific ones that you can remember early on that maybe you can elaborate on, and how you kind of overcame them?
Yeah. And I think people that start into footwear, generally, once you're through the other side, you admit like, this is way more complex than I ever thought it was going to be getting into it. Because every shoe, there's, 20 plus vendors supplying into that single product. It looks like something very simple, but there's so much that goes into it. And yeah, so I mentioned that cold call that I made. And that was really like the first industry call. And I ended up going to an industry conference. It was 2 days, and thank goodness it was, because the first day I walked around embarrassing myself. And then the second, I went back to the hotel and learned a bunch, and then came back the next day, and it's like, okay, now I think I know what I'm talking about. And then I ended up finding some really good mentors through a professor actually that had worked for Aldo Group, and he introduced me to somebody that kind of took me under his wing and showed me more about the industry. But like, even getting to manufacturing something, and it's outside of footwear. I mean, I would need an adult beverage and like 2 hours to get through that story. But the journey of sourcing and manufacture and going through that whole process is, you just have to really believe. And I think if it weren't for knowing the customer so well through my wife, and being inspired by my wife in general as a professional, as a healthcare professional, it would have been hard to get through, all of the lumps that I took, and then eventually the team, once I built the team, has taken to get to launch.
Got it. Yeah, that's a very interesting story for sure. I think I'm going to take a pause here for my questions and just kind of ask the crowd if anyone has anything that they'd want to ask Joe.
I know that you said it would take a lot of, I guess you said that it was a tough story to kind of get through, but my question is kind of about when you went about sourcing all the materials for these and going through the process of just like test trials and seeing what was going to work and what wasn't. One thing I wanted to ask about is, why did you end up settling? I did some research, but I saw that one of the materials was leather, and I was curious as to why you ended up settling on that one. And then also how those test trials went, if it was just your wife, it was your wife and some of her coworkers.
Yeah, no, I mean, super pivotal. So one thing I didn't mention is, like, between that November when I had the idea based on my wife's experience, and then February when I said, I think this is a real thing, a key component was actually going out and getting nerdy, and my case time actually really informed this, of like pulling up research studies and reading them, right? Like on footwear. And so one of the pivotal ones was this research conducted in sport on athletes at Harvard and MIT on actual the specs that are most appropriate for an athlete. And then I found another study that was conducted in Asia on nurses and folks in hospital. That's everything from like foam density, foam thickness, the actual foam makeup, like what material are you using, the specs of how the foot, the toe box size, the appropriate size and ratios so like I got extremely deep into the research, and I was coming into it without preconceived notions, which I think ended up being a big benefit. But to your question on actually testing it, I ended up meeting the chief innovation officer at Penn Medicine here in Philadelphia. And he was very generous to link me into their innovation group, which is a team of nurses that test all kinds of stuff, processes, products, anything that can change at the hospital, they'll run it through this group. And they were willing to test the first shoe. So they ended up putting 2,000 hours into the shoe. And I structured the whole program with a ton of survey inputs, interviews, and that research, it's amazing how much not only did it inform the product, but I ended up handing that to the people we partner with, even on the brand, to inform how we speak and how we look and what we focus on and who we photograph. Like, all of our models are real healthcare professionals. And so much of that came out of that really heavy duty research phase, which frankly, so many companies don't do, because it's really scary. You're scared of getting a no, right? Like, at that point, you've put so many hours into this idea that at the very least you think is a real opportunity. And so that's kind of the most scary, that's the scariest thing at the beginning, is putting it out for the world to engage with. But like, it was a huge difference maker for us. And to your point on materials, I mean, I just got really nerdy on that too. I read so much and talked to a lot of people. And I haven't held the shoe up. I always get yelled at for this. This is the Clove shoe. This is Aqua that we just released last week. But the material is actually, it's a synthetic material called Chlorino. So it's the same microstructure as leather. Like if you look at a side-by-side view through a microscope, it looks exactly, but every filament is synthetic. So it's liquid repellent, stain resistant, and like the perfect use case. And it took a long time to find it, but it's this amazing Japanese company that makes this material. And that kind of stuff really matters, right? And it took a lot of sweat equity to get to finding all of these things.
Yeah, no, that's super, super interesting. Thank you for answering my question. I know that we have to wear white shoes to our clinicals, and they look like trash. They get so dirty.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's something that healthcare too, because like when you're thinking of it or you have a business idea, I always have to think about, all right, who could be my competitor? The amazing thing about healthcare is like there's companies that don't know that, right? That they'll just put a product out. And so like it was really important for us to launch with an all-white sneaker because I knew from my wife's experience that so many clinicals require all white, right? And it's like having that next order level of understanding of your consumer group can be a real differentiator for a company.
Yeah, thank you.
Neil?
Yeah, so I also had a question. So Joe, it sounded like you alluded to going to Wharton and then also starting Clove kind of around the same time. And so, I'm a student athlete, and I mean, I find it pretty tough to juggle some of my classes and, a full-time athletic experience at the same time. And, by the sounds of it, it sounds like that, you were trying to start your own company while at school. So can you kind of talk to, if that's the case, can you kind of talk to juggling all the research you had just talked about with, going to a school like Wharton that I'm sure is pretty rigorous?
Yeah, it was crazy. But the nice thing is the reason I picked Wharton is because there's a specific entrepreneurial track, and where like I brought Clove into so much of my classwork, and I think that was fundamental. I think the other fundamental thing, to be honest, is that in the MBA program there's non-grade disclosure. So I know in undergrad that's not an option. But what that really meant for me was like I can really focus on the things that are going to be fundamental, and like I don't have to worry about if I don't get a perfect grade on my econ exam, for instance. So I think entrepreneurship in school is definitely possible. But I had to say no to a lot of things, and in hindsight, I'm very glad that I did. If things were to go another direction, there could have been some level of regret. But I really did have to focus on, this is why I'm here and this is what I came here to achieve, and you kind of have to put blinders on. But it's definitely achievable. I think starting something at school is such a huge advantage, though, because the number of meetings that I was able to get because I was a student and because I could tap into that network. If I was trying to do it while I was living in New York and just a normal employed person, like I think it would have been near impossible. So I think it lets you, it greases the rails to get into some conversations, and like for me, fundamental. If you look at my investors, if you look at our advisors, no questions asked, would not be in the position I'm in without it.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering.
Jonathan, did you have a question to ask Joe?
Yeah, I can definitely ask. Love that you already hit on the materials points. I'm actually a materials engineer, graduated from Case in 2018. So definitely that point resonates with me. But kind of speaking to your last point, and it'll develop into a question, I promise. But I am a little bit curious in regards to where you think you would be if you hadn't attended Wharton. I know that not only in the entrepreneurship track, but just in the business realm, that getting an MBA is a point of discussion, mainly because of the price tag associated with that. Many programs are, about $200,000 when you look at it at the end of the day. So do you believe that you could have still started your company without those connections at Wharton? And I guess to build upon that, what do you really foresee being the biggest obstacle from taking your company from where it is today to becoming, the Nike of its respective niche in the shoe realm?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I think that your first question, it's very it's a personal. You have to kind of assess yourself, right? I think there's people that could have had this idea and done it with just naturally based on what they had. I personally, it was really important for me because I was really excited about entrepreneurship, but I didn't kind of have the toolkit necessary to vet, to the point I made earlier of, the idea that I really was excited about. It only took 6 weeks to prove myself wrong. So I personally really needed it. I don't think that's the same for everyone. And you kind of, there's a lot, especially in entrepreneurship, being very real with yourself. And I was very real with myself, and I needed that kind of structured assistance in understanding the lay of the land. And I needed kind of the access to people to help advise me and mentor me. So for me, that it took the form of Wharton, but it could take the form of so many different things for so many different people. And there's so many successful entrepreneurs that didn't have to, go back to school. For me, it was fundamental. And I, looking back, there's just no questions asked. It changed the trajectory for me to have that experience. And I guess on your second question, yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is executing, honestly, for the company to continue to grow. And there's a lot of people that get distracted by the rest of the market. And the most important thing you can do is in the early stages is have really good assumptions first off, and then execute at an incredible level on every aspect. And I think especially in direct to consumer businesses, you are every aspect of the business, right? You're running manufacturing, you're running logistics, you are running the store, you're running customer experience. Like, we have to be great at everything. And for me as a CEO, it's thinking a lot about who is on the team and along the ride and inspiring them and putting them in positions to succeed. And so that's what we're super focused on is we have our game plan, and executing it perfectly is the mandate. And that's truly the most important. And I've talked to entrepreneurs that are on the opposite end of the growth trajectory 5, 6, 7 years in, and they say the same thing. You just have to really be focused on executing well, because this is really hard. It's definitely not easy. And so I'm very lucky to have an incredible team, and we're having a lot of fun, and that's important too.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Great questions from the crowd here. I think something that sparked my attention was when you talk about network. I think a lot of students have the ability to create a connection, but then maintaining that connection. So like, follow-ups and just following up with people you've already connected with. So I was wondering, what was your strategy going up with just kind of maintaining the connections that you had, and making sure that those were fresh and that they could be a benefit to you in the future?
Yeah, and I think why people reacted well to me when that did happen was that I had a very clear, to my very early point on getting people's attention, like I had a very clear vision of what I wanted to do. And when I was reaching out to somebody, it was for a very obvious reason. And so the counter to that is that then I never reached out to them for, in the follow-up phase without something actionable. And I wasn't ever trying to waste their time. And sometimes it would be, I wouldn't talk to somebody for 6 months. But there's conversations, there's folks that have helped me that in aggregate, I've talked to 2 hours, but those 2 hours are worth 100 hours from someone else. And it's being really thoughtful about finding those right people. And I like one of my business partners, there's two folks that really launched the company with me. One I met through the MBA program. The other, I just found her profile on LinkedIn and was like, if I could get this person to join the journey with me, it would be fun. That would change the trajectory. And, you know, if you think about that relationship, it was kind of crazy. I met her in a coffee shop, and within 45 minutes, I was convinced. And over this next 6 months, I had to convince her, you know, to leave her job and change everything that she was planning to do. So building that relationship was truly fundamental. And, you know, now it feels like family, to be honest. And that just took a lot of time. So I don't know if that's directly answering your question, but, you know, there's different relationships and different levels. And I think where people run into issues is when they ask for too much from somebody that they really, if you could just get 45 minutes, and that 45 minutes could be a game changer. And then you leave it. You don't need to bug them. So, you know, that's hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely. Having something actionable, I guess, is the biggest takeaway, and always making sure you're not wasting someone's time is always key. Professor Goldberg, you had a question?
I do. Thanks, Earl. This is great, Joe, by the way, and thanks everybody for the questions. Some really good food for thought. By the way, your comment about non-grade disclosure at Wharton, which I think a lot of our case students would enjoy and appreciate. Basically, and I had it as well. And actually, it was not having to kind of stress about employers seeing grades. Also, for me, opened up kind of doors to pursue other things. So I had sort of forgotten about it until you mentioned it. It was highly important for me. I wanted to ask you about, as you think kind of back to the university, and I loved actually hearing the stories about Gary Kravitz, who, as you know, is still here teaching and mentoring students. Is an amazing guy. And Richard Osborne, who I had the privilege of being a colleague here with and impacted some of these students. And you know, he has a huge legacy. So obviously you've got deep connections. I mean, one of the things that Doug and I are working on, this Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship, is relatively new. And when we think about how we help, particularly on the venture creation side, we're working with students like, you know, with Earl and Jackie and Jonathan and Neil and others who either are interning in places or starting things. So there's a student pipeline. There's faculty that we're working with. Some of them are thinking about spitting out ideas. But I'm sort of curious in your perspective on how CASE can help alums like you. I mean, you're doing all the things that you're doing, the networks, the raising capital, are great lessons and examples for us. And I just am curious if you think there's something that the university could be doing, particularly for those of us working in the entrepreneurship space, to help you going forward.
Yeah, well, I think setting up the Veale Center, for instance, like that's just in itself such a fundamental, having kind of that gathering point, is in folks that have actively raised their hands and to help is a big thing. And, you know, I struggle honestly with thinking about, you know, objectively about how do you institutionalize entrepreneurship, because every entrepreneur needs a different thing, right? Like I came in with a set of skills that maybe some other founder didn't have, but you know, it's like it's a very nebulous and kind of hard to grasp concept. But I think like the early days, frankly, the biggest thing was like feeling like you had the license to raise your hand and say, I want to be an entrepreneur, right? And like having that round table of other entrepreneurs that are in that same phase. Like the first year for me was really hard. And there's a lot of falling flat on my face. And if I didn't have other founders around me that were going through the same thing and willing to talk about it, you know, I wouldn't have had the courage to keep going in many instances. And so from a case perspective, I think it is having forums like this where there's people that have graduated and can come back and talk about, you know, the realities of this. I think the media in particular can can sometimes gloss over the experience, and there's a lot of tough decisions and tough moments to get to what can become a success. So, for me, that's, and there's a lot of like, there's some like really core things that there was a specific track at Wharton, which is called the Venture Implementation Program, which literally was a you had to apply to get in with your idea, and then there was a track that you went on where you learned about fundraising and you learned about pitching, and you got to pitch, and that stuff was really fundamental. And I mean, I'm happy to talk more about things I learned from that experience. But I mean, the core thing with building the community, I think, is just having like-minded folks, and it sounds like we do on this Zoom already, which is super important. That to me is like the most important personally for me.
That's great. No, thanks for sharing. Appreciate you.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off that, Joe, I think the venture and the entrepreneurial space at Case, I think Professor Goldberg and Doug and I work more closely with Professor Shane, but they've all done a really good job of being open to speak and help. And I think that's really key, because sometimes speaking to people that you don't really know is a bit scary, or is they're a bit off-putting. And I think Case has done a really good job of being open with discussion, which is very important, especially in the entrepreneurial space. So I'm going to get a little bit selfish here, because I have interest in venture capital, and I know you guys just raised a 1.5 million seed round. And I kind of want to talk about that a bit. What was that fundraising process like? Like you talked about, you learned what to do in fundraising through Wharton, but just kind of, how was that like? What was like pitching investors? What strategies did you kind of take upon, kind of go into that?
Yeah, and I think some of the discussions earlier about like how you reach out to folks and maintain relationships, I think that's incredibly important from an investor standpoint. I really, my thesis on raising capital was, and there's people that do it differently, I wanted to vet every aspect of the business. And so that literally when I walked up to an investor, it was like, here is the entire game plan. I really just need your capital to breathe life into this business. There's some people that back in November of 2017, when I had the idea, that the next thing they would do is go and raise money. And that's fine too. It's a beauty of the system that we built here in America. You can kind of do both. But I wanted to really prove out the idea. And so like when I actually went to raise money, it really just took a couple weeks to have the term sheet that eventually turned into our seed round. And but that relationship with that investor specifically, I'd first started talking to them 10 months before. And I really looked especially or specifically on the investor front. I used those intros to get help along the way, right? So I talked to a lot of investors from very early, not about giving me money, but about what have you seen in other portfolio companies that have done really well, and what do I need to be doing right now? What in your opinion? And so I built a lot of relationships through those kind of discussions. And I think just in life, but especially in business and in entrepreneurship, it's really beneficial to meet somebody, tell them what you're going to do, go do it, and then come back to them and say, here's what I did and here's what I learned. And I use that exact approach with investors. And, that was really fundamental for our capital raising was so easy, but there's a lot of pre-work that went into it. But I think people run into issues when they start that too early and they haven't answered fundamental questions about the business. Or that they're just meeting someone for the first time and it's the first pitch, and then it's 6 months later before someone's going to trust you. So that's the approach I used, which was really helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think definitely, especially at the early stage, you're raising a seed round, and just it's so risky at that stage, and that you need to not only just kind of validate the idea, but also just gain the trust of the person, because they're investing in you essentially, right? And so at the early stage, they're investing in the CEO, and it's definitely, your approach was a way to really to get them to trust you and give you money to do make Clove. And so I was doing a bit of research, and I looked on Crunchbase that you got investors that are more related to brand. So like they have like focuses on brand. Is that correct? Is Crunchbase accurate? Joe?
Yeah. So our lead investor, they've done a lot, not in brand, but really in like the direct to consumer space. And they've touched a lot of different products from they have investments in footwear, but they've done a whole host of different things. But that was really important to me, to have folks that can advise on that. Like I said, the complexity of this business is that you as the business are running every aspect of the engagement. It's not really like there was a lot of complexity in the product, but I thought the investors I wanted to be able to advise on every aspect of the business. And so that's been amazing, because I've been very lucky in who we've had advising us, because that was our focus.
Got it. Okay. And so, and then I guess my question would be just kind of next steps for Clove. Are you trying to kind of build Clove out as a brand, or just more of a hey, this is a shoe that's really good for healthcare, and then just kind of pivot from that? Or is it more like you want Clove to be a household name in different aspects, not just shoes?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a ton of room to build a really big business specifically within healthcare. But we built this feedback loop with our customer base that we listen to like crazy. And that's another point of the direct to consumer business model, is that if you're smart about it, you can build a community that helps inform the future of the business, right? So we've already made product decisions based on that team. We're constantly iterating the product that we have based on the folks that are in our community. And so we're always going to be listening to that. I think focus is really important, especially early on. And we're really focused on healthcare professionals specifically and the products that we're making. But we're always listening and are always going to be reactive to ideas that come across.
Got it. It's very interesting. And I'm last question here, gonna finish off with Jackie. You had a question for Joe?
Yeah, I do. So when I was scrolling through your website yesterday, I came across the part on the Clove Collective. And I'm always super interested to hear about community involvement and give back programs that businesses, especially small businesses, have going on. So I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on that, what it is, and then how it also contributes to your brand and your business.
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Jackie. It's something I'm really proud of. So, I think we had some, especially in healthcare, there's a lot of influencers in healthcare that it's really interesting, because it's not like a Kardashian situation. There's actual professionals that are practicing nurses, practicing doctors, that have also built these followings based on talking about the realities of being a healthcare professional. And for us, that's like the core tenet of the brand. It's not always bright, shiny, happy times, right? And I think COVID's brought that into focus in an incredible way. But, we had that as a core piece of our brand well before COVID happened, because of my wife's experience. I held her in my arms when she lost her first patient. I celebrated with her when she passed her NCLEX, right? So I've seen the highs and lows, and it was really important for that to be reflected in the brand. And so the Clove Collective really was born out of that. We wanted to find a group of healthcare professionals that shared our values and would help inform what we do as a brand. So we kind of set this group up of folks that talk to their communities, and they use the typical kind of community. We call it a community code, but it's like an influencer code. But the difference for Clove is the commission that they get, Clove matches and donates to an organization of the collective choice. So this quarter, it's been the National Black Nurses Association. We ended up sending almost 300 students to their national conference, which is just kicked off today, for free. And it's just such an amazing way, is even to your point, early on in a business's life, to give back. And it's been really an important thing for us. And what I'm most proud about is that it's something that's 365 days a year. So It's not just you write a check and you move on. It's really built into our business model. And to us, that was really important.
I think that's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, Joe, actually, this is the final question. Neil, go ahead.
Sorry, I had to get one more question in.
Great.
So you've talked about, falling flat on your face, multiple times. And you've mentioned that throughout your story. And this is something I feel like I hear a lot of entrepreneurs talk about. I think Jeff Bezos is a good example. He always talks about failure and how it's helped him. Is there any failure that you can think of that might stand out to the rest that, maybe has accelerated your progress or, I don't know, really changed what you've been able to do with Clove?
Yeah, I think it frankly was something in you guys as case students, I hadn't had a lot of failure in my life coming up to then, right? Like to get into case by itself, you had to have batted near 1,000 in life, right? And everything that I to my journey to date had been a lot of lucky breaks, and that's the amazing thing about entrepreneurship is it exposes you to getting kicked around, and it was hard to adapt to at first. I think the most fundamental one was between my first and second year, so the summer of 2018. I had met a manufacturer that looked like was going to be an incredible partner, and I'd spent 3 months with them designing the product, getting it ready, and we were just about to produce the first set of samples. And I got an email from the CEO saying, we're shutting down effective immediately. And I called him, and it was an Australian company. They had issues with an investor that had gotten sued, and their capital had been called back, and it overnight flipped the business on its head. And that was honestly the darkest days of where I was like, I have to start from zero. What came out of that though is a couple of days later, the head of manufacturing emailed me and said, Joe, I believe in you. I believe in your idea. If you're willing to continue to work with me, I have other contacts that I'm happy to make for you. And like what I learned out of that process was like, and I've met him since, and he said there was 14 other companies that were in the same phase as you that I did not send that email to. You're the only one. And it's because of your character and how you respected and treated us leading up to that point. And, that was kind of an interesting, because I think, especially in entrepreneurship, you want to move fast and you can be very aggressive. And in relationships, still at the end of the day, truly matter. And I built a great one with them. But I think another lesson out of that was like, you always need to be thinking of what are the failure points. And so like now when we talk to vendors, we don't just go to one and say, this is the marriage, right? We talk to a lot, and we're always thinking about what are the potholes that we're going to run into. And so now when we have a problem, it's really, we think of it as a company as a learning opportunity. We rarely get upset when something goes wrong, because it's like, okay, what fundamental assumption did we have that this just proved wrong, and how do we build that out of our business model? And I think now I have a very different lens of when things get screwed up. Don't get me wrong, I get slightly ticked off, but when something goes wrong, but you can very quickly turn it into an opportunity, right? And it's not something that someone can tell you, like everyone that's listening now, like me telling you this doesn't, you got to go and get beat up to learn this one. It's a character and it's a life trait, right? Versus something you can learn. But I encourage you to go out and give it a go.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I wish I could just hear your failure and learn, but you're right. It has to happen to you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was the last question officially. So Joe, thanks for coming. And I'm going to turn it back to Professor Goldberg, and he's going to sign us off.
Great. Earl, thank you for moderating. You did a great job. Really well-paced. Well, yeah. Woo, props.
Thank you. Thank
you. This is great. I think your honest, reflections on the journey, and I think for students that are on this call and colleagues like Ron and sort of folks watching, there's a lot to unpack, and look forward to keeping in touch. I hope this is sort of the beginning of our engagement with you and some of the work we're doing on campus and entrepreneurship. And it was funny when Neil was asking his question with his Australian accent. I don't know if it like, you know, triggered that story of, you know, your Australian suppliers. So,
we're still working with Aussies. Love the Aussies. So.